Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to part 3 of our look at the Ranger class through the ages. Today we are taking a look at Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, or as it became known after 2003, D&D 3.0. This is the first version of the Ranger class that I ever actually got to play, and so I'm certainly nostalgic for the class, but we'll take a look and see how good it actually is, especially compared to like the previous version in 2nd edition AD&D. So the Ranger class starts on page 44 of the Player's Handbook, and a couple things to note with 3rd edition. The first thing is that there are no longer any racial restrictions for the core classes in the game. So the Ranger in previous editions could only be played as if you were a human, a half-elf, or in 2nd edition AD&D you could actually be a regular elf, but no other race was able to take the Ranger class. In 3rd edition, that restriction is gone. You can have Dwarven Rangers, Half-Orc Rangers, you could have a Gnome Paladin if you wanted to. The racial restrictions no longer apply. Also, for the Ranger in 3rd edition, alignment is no longer a restriction. Several classes still do have alignment requirements, but the Ranger is no longer one of them. In the past, you had to have a good alignment. You could be lawful, chaotic, or neutral, but you still had to be good. In 3rd edition, a Ranger could be lawful good, they could be chaotic neutral, or they could be chaotic evil. It doesn't matter. They could choose any alignment in the game. Rangers also receive D10s for their hit dice, and 3rd edition also used a skill system, which was now part of the default rules as opposed to non-weapon proficiencies in 2nd edition, which were technically optional. Rangers do gain sort of a middle of the ground number of skill points, getting 4 plus their intelligence modifier in skill points every level. At 1st level, that number is multiplied by 4 because you could have more than one rank in a skill at 1st level. I'm not going to get into the whole skill system, but at 1st level, it made sense for them to get 4 times the skill points so they could actually max out several of the skills that they would choose. Rangers have skills that are good for mobility, good for scouting, such as like the stealth skills of hide and move silently, as well as the perception skills of spot and listen. They would also have wilderness lore, which plays into one of their other class features that they get. Knowledge, nature, the ability to use the heal skill using like natural remedies, wild empathy, intuit direction. They get a decent amount of skills that they can choose from, but with only 4 plus their intelligence modifier, it's difficult to have like a really great set of skills that you actually have points in. And truthfully, with 3rd edition, you usually wanted to max out your ranks in the skills that you were proficient with, because otherwise the DCs would just eventually reach the point where you just couldn't succeed and it would be a waste of your skill points in the first place. So again, that's a whole other discussion for another video, but they do gain a better number of skill points per level than, like, say, the fighter or even the cleric. I think it's like only 2 plus their intelligence modifier. Anyway, moving on. Weapon and armor proficiency. So Rangers are proficient with all simple and martial weapons, same as the fighter, the paladin, and the barbarian. They are also proficient in light armor, medium armor, and shields. Now, I'm going to talk about that sort of in my opinion part of the video. So they don't get access to all armors like they used to. And 1st and 2nd edition, they could wear any suit of armor. Although in 2nd edition, if they wore anything heavier than stud leather, there was a drawback. And that's the same in 3rd edition, because if the Ranger wears anything other than light armor, they lose the following abilities. So if they're wearing light armor or no armor, they get to fight with 2 weapons as if they had both the ambidexterity and the 2-weapon fighting feat. They lose that ability if they wear medium armor or if they use a double-ended weapon like a double-bladed sword or an orc double axe, or like the Dwarven Urgosh, which has an axe on one end and I think like a spear on the other. So if they use those double weapons, they don't gain the benefits of the 2-weapon fighting feats, and they lose the benefits of the 2-weapon fighting feats if they're wearing medium armor, even though they're proficient in it. They also do gain spells. Rangers now have their own spell list. It's not great, but it's a little bit better than what they had in 2nd edition. They start gaining spells technically at 4th level, but they would have to have a high enough wisdom in order to gain a bonus spell slot, because at 4th and 5th level, they get 0 spell slots, but they can add bonus spells for their high wisdom. They gain their first real spell slot at 6th level. Rangers, like all classes that have spell casting, also have to have an ability score of 10 plus the spell level in order to be able to cast spells. So since they get up to 4th level spells, for them to be able to cast all of the spell levels that they have available to them, they would need to have a 14 wisdom. If they had a 10 wisdom or less, then they just simply couldn't cast spells at all, because they don't gain 0 level spells like wizards and clerics and druids do. They also gained the track feat as a bonus feat, and the track feat allows you to track creatures using your ranks in wilderness lore for your ability check. They also gained their favored enemy ability. Now, this is the first time we're actually calling it favored enemy. And if you recall, in my 1st and 2nd edition videos, I referred to their abilities when it comes to attacking certain types of creatures as favored enemy, even though it wasn't actually named. This is the edition that finally named it. So from now on, we can actually use the title given to it. At 1st level, they get to choose their first favored enemy. And when they choose their favorite enemy, they gain a +1 bonus to bluff skill checks, listen checks, sense motive checks, spot checks, and wilderness lore checks. They also gain a +1 bonus on damage rolls against the selected type of creature, and they can choose creatures from the list as provided here. So aberrations, animals, beasts, constructs, dragons, elementals, fae, giants, humanoid type with an asterisk, magical beast, oozes, outsider type, again with an asterisk next to it, plants, shape changers, undead, and vermin. For the outsider type and the humanoid type, because they have the asterisks, what it means is you have to choose a more specific version of that type of creature. So if you chose aberrations, for example, any type of aberration monster whatsoever, you would get the bonus to fight. So if it's a Grick, if it's a Grell, if it's a Beholder, a Mind Flayer, or Gibbering Mouther, any of those enemies, you would get your favorite enemy damage on and bonuses on the skill checks for. However, with humanoids and outsiders, you have to be more specific. So for outsiders, you have to choose whether it's something like a demon, a devil, the Afridi, or the Slads. And for humanoids, you have to choose like goblinoid or reptilian humanoids, or like humans, elves, dwarves, things along those lines. So you have to be very specific when it comes to humanoids and when it comes to outsiders. Now, unless you're in evil alignment, you cannot choose your own race to be your favorite enemy. So if a human wanted humans to be their favorite enemy, they would have to have one of the 3 evil alignments, and that's something that they could do now because you can technically have evil rangers. Now at 5th level and every 5 levels thereafter, so 5, 10, 15, and 20, the ranger gains an additional favorite enemy, and they just choose again from the following list. That new favorite enemy would gain the +1 bonus on the skill checks and the damage rolls, and any previously selected favorite enemies would have their skill bonuses and damage bonus increased by an additional +1. So at 2nd level, their second favorite enemy would get a +1 bonus against, and their first favorite enemy would now get a +2 bonus. At 20th level, their 5th favorite enemy would get a +1 bonus against, their 4th favorite enemy would get a +2 bonus, 3rd favorite enemy would get a +3 bonus, 2nd favorite enemy would get a +4 bonus, and that first favorite enemy would get a +5 bonus against. And we'll talk a bit more about how I feel about that ability in the review portion of the video. Finally, at 9th level, the ranger can choose to gain the improved 2-weapon fighting feat. So they can gain the feat even if they don't meet the prerequisites, which would require them actually having the legitimate ambidexterity and 2-weapon fighting feats. But with this version of the ranger class, they can take that actual feat without meeting those requirements. However, they cannot use their improved weapon fighting feat, again, if they're wearing medium armor, because they would lose their prerequisites of ambidexterity and 2-weapon fighting. So you get to choose an actual feat without meeting its prereqs, but you can't use it if you can't use the prereqs because you're wearing a light or a heavier suit of armor. So that's the ranger class. Those are the abilities. That's the breakdown of the class itself. As far as my thoughts on the class go, there are some things that I think that the class does pretty well. I do like the skill system in 3rd edition. It's definitely not perfect, and the Ranger being a class that is meant to be a bit more skill oriented, it would have been nice for them to have a greater number of skill points available to them. The issue with it being 4 plus their intelligence modifier is that really there's 3 other abilities, maybe even 4 others attributes that the Ranger would want to focus on first before they really get into their intelligence. So strength is important for Rangers because of the 2-up and melee fighting ability. Dexterity is also important because they are wearing lighter armor and they would use their dexterity for ranged attacks. And then you probably want a decent constitution because you're still a fighting type of class. And if you're using the 2-up and fighting ability, you're in melee, which means that you want to have a good amount of health that you can fall back on because, again, you're wearing lighter suits of armor. And then finally, you want a good wisdom because you want to take advantage of your spellcasting ability. And you're gonna need at least an 11 in that to use your first level spells. But if you want to have access to the full range of Ranger spells, then you're gonna need a 14. So that kind of puts intelligence and charisma at the lower end of the priority spectrum. And then if you want more skills based off your intelligence modifier, then you have to choose which of those other attributes you're potentially willing to sacrifice. So it's definitely an interesting concept, but I don't think it's executed as well as perhaps it could be. And that goes for a lot of other abilities as well. But before we get to that, I will take a moment to say that I think that Ranger spellcasting is better than what it was, certainly in 2nd edition AD&D. It's probably not as good as the 1st edition version where they could choose from both the Druid spell list and the Magic User spell list. They do get their own list of spells here, which let me just see if I can just quickly flip to it here. So they do get their own selection now. They're not necessarily great, although they do get the ability to summon Nature's Ally now, starting with their first level spell slots. And if you remember the 2nd edition Ranger, I should say, sorry, one of the things that I did remember saying was that it was a shame that they didn't gain anything beyond a 3rd level spell slot, because 4th level is when the clerics started getting access, the Animal Sphere started getting access to the summon animal spell. Whereas in 3rd edition, they can do that pretty much right off the bat, which I think is great. Now, other spells at 1st level aren't necessarily all that good. They do get Cure Light Wounds at 2nd level, as well as Cure Serious Wounds as a 4th level spell slot. And those are actually pretty decent, not necessarily for the spell slot itself, but because they can cast those spells, it does mean that they can actually utilize wands of the same name. So they can use a Cure Light Wounds wand or a Cure Serious Wounds wand, which makes them a really great secondary healer, especially outside of combat when you have more time to burn multiple charges. So I think that the spell casting, while not great, is still, better than what we had before with the previous edition. So I will give the spell casting the edge for the 3rd edition one versus the 2nd edition version. Favorite enemy, I do like the fact that it does finally go back to the damage component as opposed to the attack roll. But the issue with that is the highest bonus that you get for that damage comes with the choice that you have to make at 1st level. And that put people in kind of an awkward position because you really had to think about when you wanted that highest bonus potential for your favorite enemy to be utilized the most. Do you choose something that makes sense for your 1st level character, like goblinoids or orcs or reptilian humanoids, so you can do attack things like kobolds? Do you choose something like that to gain the immediate benefit of that ability, or do you choose something that you expect to fight more at higher levels where a higher bonus would be appreciated, such as like dragons or giants or even like things like devils or demons? And the question is, why would a 1st level ranger choose something like dragons, giants, or devils or demons as their favorite enemy when they're probably not going to encounter anything like that until much later in their career, which means they're also unlikely to have trained from youth to fight those particular creatures. it's a trade-off, right? Like which makes more sense to you. And I knew people that would choose enemies for their first level favorite enemy that they didn't expect to pay off until they were, 17th, 18th, or even 19th level, sort of towards the end of the campaign. As far as the favorite enemy ability goes as well, there is one caveat to the ability when it comes to the damage rolls, and that is that only creatures that are vulnerable to sneak attack or critical hits will actually take the bonus damage. So that means that even though you can choose constructs, plants, oozes, and undead as your favorite enemies, they cannot take critical hits. They're immune to critical hits. They're immune to sneak attack damage, which means that the only benefit that you're getting for having them as a favorite enemy is the bonus on the skill checks. And as somebody who ran 3rd edition, as well as 3.5, a combination of the two for over a decade, I can tell you that the amount of times that those skill bonuses really came in handy was a handful, compared to the fact that the main feature that they wanted was the bonus damage. So it takes, a significant chunk of your options pretty much away from you, unless you only care about the skills, which, again, I don't know anybody that would say, I don't care about the damage bonus as long as I get the bonus on sense motive, right? Like to see if the vampire is going to try to kill me, which, spoiler alert, the vampire is going to try to kill you. Another big issue that I really have with the 3rd edition Ranger is their 2-weapon fighting ability. In 2nd edition AD&D, they were limited to a lighter suit of armor to gain the benefit of their 2-weapon fighting, but if they did so, they got to attack with 2 weapons with 0 penalties whatsoever. In 3rd edition, you do gain the benefit of both the ambidexterity and 2-weapon fighting feat, but what that does is it just reduces the penalties. It doesn't eliminate them. If you were using a lighter weapon in your offhand from your primary weapon, or you're using something like 2 daggers, you still take a -2 penalty on both your primary weapon and your offhand attacks. So at first level, having the -2 penalty really puts you at a disadvantage, because it turns your base attack bonus when using your 2-weapon fighting ability, which is a major class feature, all the way down to a -1 plus like your strength modifier to actually make your attack bonuses. So let's just say you had a 16 strength, which gives you a +3 bonus. Normally you would attack at +4, but if you're using your 2-weapon fighting abilities, you're attacking at +2. So it's one of those things where it's still just not as good as saying that they can do it without the penalties, because you are limiting them from using all of their proficiencies, because the Ranger gets medium armor proficiency, even though using that proficiency eliminates their ability to use their 2-weapon fighting. I think the trade-off should be that they, get the ability to attack with 2 weapons with 0 penalty if they're wearing light armor, or if they're taking advantage of the medium armor proficiency that the game gives them, then they have to use it as if they had the feats, and just give them the feats, and they still get the -2, -2. But if they choose to handicap themselves a little bit by giving them a lighter suit of armor than what they could potentially use, then take away those penalties. I think that would have been a better approach. And like I said, the favorite enemy is good, but the problem is that the bonuses are kind of inverted from what you might want. And it means that for the favorite enemy, a 20th level Ranger gets to choose their final favorite enemy at their maximum level for a +1 bonus, which I knew people that would just write down anything because they didn't care what that 5th favorite enemy was. They only cared about getting their first favorite enemy up to that +5 bonus. So that is the Ranger class, and the way that I can sum up the 3rd edition Ranger is cool idea, poor execution. And it makes me feel similar to the 2nd edition AD&D Ranger. Like, I don't know which one I would put over the other in terms of overall abilities. Like, the Ranger being able to fight with 2 weapons in 2nd edition with 0 penalties is, undeniably better than still having -2 on both sets of attacks in 3rd edition. But the favorite enemy still dealing extra damage, I think, is better than the attack bonus in the 2nd edition version. Even though it's not great, it's still overall better, because, you know, your first favorite enemy gets up to +5, your second favorite enemy gets up to +4, even your third favorite enemy at +3 is not bad. And that's, you know, the equivalent of like, you know, an extra like what, 12 damage, you know, spread out over three different types of enemies. I still think that's better than a +4 attack bonus against one very specific enemy type. So favorite enemy is better in third edition, but it's still got a long way to go for it to actually be a really good class feature. And actually, I know people that also didn't play a ranger beyond first level. They would just take a first level ranger and then they would pair it with something like a rogue to gain the 2-up and fighting benefits, and then still have a class that does like the light armor. So they would just take one level ranger for the tracking ability, and hey, an extra +1 damage against an enemy type is fine, and then the 2-up and fighting, and then never touch another level of the ranger class. There were some products that had options for Rangers that did make them better. I don't own the book, but in third edition, there were the softcover supplements, and one was called Masters of the Wild. And I don't remember much about that book because I never owned it, but I do remember that the Ranger had a feat called Extra Favorite Enemy. And what that would do is it would just grant them a new favorite enemy, and they would choose that new favorite enemy. It would get that +1 bonus, and then every previous version of the favorite enemy that you had chosen would also get bumped up by +1. So let's just say at 12th level, your feat that you gain for reaching that level, you take the extra favorite enemy ability. That new favorite enemy would be at +1. Your third favorite enemy, which would normally only be +1 until you gained your fourth favorite enemy at 15th level, now that goes up to +2. Your second favorite enemy would go up to +3, and then your first favorite enemy would actually go up to +4. And then at 15th level, when you gained that next favorite enemy, your first favorite enemy would go up to +5. And then at 20th level, if you had chosen the extra favorite enemy feat once, that first level choice would go up to +6. So it was actually a pretty decent feat to take. And that was actually one of the feats that I do remember taking for my Ranger class. I wish I remembered more of the abilities that they got in that book. So similar to the second edition AD&D video, I will say that if you own Masters of the Wild, please feel free to let me know in the comments below, and let everybody in the comments below know what some of the new options for Rangers were. Personally, I would love to see if there was a feat or a feature that the Ranger could take that would let them use their medium armor proficiency without taking away their 2-up and fighting ability, because I just can't stand the fact that even now, like as far as third edition, they still give them armor that they are penalized for using, and I just think that that's bad design overall. But anyway, those are my thoughts. This was still the first time I ever played the Ranger, and even though the class kind of sucks, or it kind of sucked back then, I still loved every minute of playing that character. So those memories are never going to go away, and they're not going to be diminished because I am more willing to acknowledge the shortcomings of the class a decade or two later. I still had a great time playing them, and I don't want to detract anyone from playing a Ranger in third edition. Although I would say that if you're interested, I would recommend taking a look at the next video that we'll all be doing in this series, when we take a look at the 3.5 Ranger. When 3.5 came out, it was marketed as a revision to the third edition core rule set. And one of the things that was done was several of the classes saw improvements. Some classes saw relatively minor tweaks, whereas certain classes got a complete and total overhaul from top to bottom, and no class was modified more between third and 3.5 than the Ranger class. So I hope you come back from that one. This version was the first Ranger I ever played. The next version is the best Ranger I ever played, and we'll be taking a look at that later on this week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what are some of your favorite third edition, and by third edition I mean 3.0 memories of the Ranger class. Did you just take a single level of Ranger for the 2-up and fighting benefits and then never touch the class again? Did you choose a favorite enemy at first level that made sense for a first level character to choose? Or did you choose something that you expected to pay off much later when you got into the higher level ranges of 15th through 20th? Let me know all that in the comments below. So thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you come back for the 3.5 video. And until next time, take care.